All right, we are joined with Mr. Alan Brochstein, 420 investor, known as the Insider. Everybody wants to have the best information. They come to Mr. Brochstein. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. How's things been over the past couple of months, lifestyle-wise? You're in Houston, correct?
Yeah, well, so anybody that knows me knows I'm pretty much sheltering at home all the time. So
Yeah, obviously get into this cannabis industry. It's been a little bit of an unexpected year, which is pretty much the norm for the cannabis industry. You never know what
right.
to expect next. So I guess I wanted to have you on here and just ask some of the things like, what are you hearing? And most importantly, like what currently stands out to you right now in this space?
Yeah, so we came into the year, already pretty much almost 2 years into a bear market. And I was optimistic at the beginning of the year for a couple of reasons. I thought in your neck of the woods, things were going to get better, more retail stores, for example, and then Cannabis 2.0. While I thought it would be slow, it's a big step in the right direction. And then south of the border, I was really optimistic. Illinois was legalizing, and I was expecting that would catalyze other states to legalize later this year through the legislative process. So, I envisioned that we would come to the end of this bear market. What I didn't envision was how, and it happened swiftly and brutally with the pandemic, of course. And I honestly didn't know how to process what was going on because one of the things that's been concerning me is the weak balance sheets and in the cannabis industry on both sides of the border, and cash flow problems, especially north. In Canada, it's just terrible, right? These companies are lighting their cash on fire, and so the pandemic I didn't know exactly how to process it, and that's okay. You get a shock like this, and it takes some time to figure it out. And what I learned was a couple of things. First, all the things I was hopeful that were going to happen got deferred, which is negative, right? And two, but not only are they deferred, they're more likely. With tax revenues and everything right now, joblessness, these issues are going to drive what I was looking for, but next year, not this year. But the more important thing, I think it's important to understand for both Canadian and American investors and operators, is that when we talk about competition in the industry, we're not talking about canopy growth versus Aphria. We're talking about the legal market versus the illicit market. And this is especially painful in Canada, which has a very large and prominent illicit market, in California, which has really been winning the battle. And so this is why it took me a little bit of a while. I wanted to see what was playing out. And what I saw was that, first of all, the word essential service was a pretty cool term. Be applied to our industry, but it's just a word. But what essential service meant was that all these governments, they wanted to protect patients, they wanted to protect their money as well. They moved to allow cannabis operators to use technology to have delivery and curbside pickup in a lot of markets where that was never allowed before. And I think these things will be permanent. And I think this really levels the playing field in a lot of ways. Not 100%, but the illicit market benefits from convenience. They've always had that leg up, and price. And so the price is still, obviously an issue. But right now in the pandemic, people are focused on health and wellness. So I think they might be willing to pay a higher price for lab-tested product. And the vaping crisis kind of reinforced that concept. But more importantly, I don't know Canadians as well as I know Americans, but I imagine all North Americans like Amazon.com and the convenience of going online and ordering. And it's challenging.
York just knocked Amazon's here.
We are now seeing Amazon-like experiences. I was able to order some cannabis from my half-sister who lives in California online. It was for her birthday. It was the coolest thing for me to be able to do that. And these things, that's not really from the pandemic, by the way, but I think this type of behavior is going to kick in. And one of the big problems in the United States has been the not in my backyard syndrome, where many of the Southern California local municipalities reject retail. It's been a huge problem in Massachusetts, the first place to go legal on the East Coast. Even in Illinois, it's not a huge problem, but there are some rejections at the local level. So I think it's all lining up. the lower prices, the fact that a lot of companies are going to get wiped out, which means if you can predict who's going to be a winner, then there's a bigger pie for them. So that's kind of led me to call this the third wave. And I can talk about what the other two waves are, but the second wave really got started in advance of the 2016 elections and Canada legalizing ultimately and California legalizing. And it ended basically with this bottom. The peak of that cycle was actually when California legalized.
So you released an article last month about, a possible third wave. It was like how the third wave in cannabis stocks begins,
right?
A regulatory framework being built in the state and federal level in the US. Why do you think that? And what are you hearing that maybe the average investor is unaware of?
Yeah, well, so I think it gets back to the point I was making. This pandemic is going to wipe out a lot of companies. Don't make no mistake. There's still too much debt, not enough profit. This is a real problem for a lot of operators. Up in Canada, we're seeing bankruptcies left and right. Even today, it's not 100% cannabis related, but Pixis, which owns an LP, they also have American hemp operations, declare bankruptcy, for example. There's a lot more to that than their cannabis operations, but we've seen smaller private and public LPs go under. We've seen some bankruptcies in the United States. It's nasty. So let's make no mistake. But we've also seen this year that the best companies are able to either attract new capital, whether it's debt or sale leaseback. We've seen that in the United States and even up in Canada. You take a company like Afria, and there was a yellow light, there was no red light there, but they had all this debt and they had cash that was equivalent, but they were able to convert that debt. So now all of a sudden they have a better balance sheet. And so we're seeing these balance sheet repairs. We're seeing the strong get stronger. And I think between that, the fact that there's confidence that those that can survive will thrive, as well as these regulatory changes that I think impact both Canada and the United States, more delivery, more curbside pickup, things like that, more distribution points. All this bodes to what I hope is a saner wave. It was insane in the second wave and the first wave too. So hopefully the industry has matured a lot. We have something at New Cannabis Ventures that we call the public company revenue and income tracker. And we didn't have this at the beginning of the second wave because we were lazy. No, it was a joke. All these companies were on the come back then. Nobody had substantial revenue. But a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we saw all of a sudden real companies with real revenue. And then we had to modify it and add income. And we started to see some big discrepancies. But, oh, by the way, GTI here in the United States, over $100 million revenue. That's more on a US dollar basis than Canopy or Aurora. And they're profitable. It's amazing to see this play out. And, I'm hopeful. I don't know if I mentioned it in that article, but one of the other things I think about is it is not illegal for the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange to list a multi-state operator. It's not illegal.
Oh.
And I can't tell you that if the Democrats get control of Congress in the fall, that it will definitely happen. But I think there's a possibility. I'm not looking for federal legalization anytime soon, but I'm looking for rationalization of U.S. Federal policy. I mean, it's insane. We can talk about it, but just for your listeners that may not appreciate how insane things are, power companies derive substantial revenue selling to state legal, federally illegal cannabis operators. A lot of money. They take that money and they put it in the bank. Okay. So we know that there's not a total inability to take money from the state legal, federally legal cannabis system. At the same time, the banks will not list these companies. I'm sorry, the exchanges will not list these companies. Now, people misunderstand. They think that banks won't bank federally illegal cannabis companies. Not true. A lot of community banks, even some of the large banks, will work with these companies, but it's hit or miss, and it's a huge problem for social reasons and health reasons to not allow cash. And I mentioned technology. To be able to.
Let me cut you off there, though. Like, if the banks are able to do business, why are some of these companies having a hard time raising money? Why are they running into like, financing issues?
Oh, they don't want to so the investment banks, they have a big business. They don't want to risk it. So
Right,
it's just their own preference. It's not illegal for these banks to bank them. And as a
right,
matter of fact, a lot of them have coverage of them, but they won't bank them. And so I care less about that.
right,
I care more about the exchanges, because what I see going on right now is increasing interest in US cannabis. But then investors say, well, I don't want to buy a CSE name. I want to buy in US dollars. Ooh, I don't want to buy OTC. So the biggest, best, and also the worst, but all these American cannabis operators, they don't trade on the higher exchanges. At the
right.
same time, we are seeing some ancillary companies trade on these higher exchanges, and they're attracting a lot of interest. They're all going up a lot. It's a trend I expect to continue. And it just kind of shows you what might happen if US investors were able to invest directly in cannabis,
Makes sense.
not just Canadian companies.